Contentment. We're on this contentment series, and this week I want to talk, and we're in this Secrets of Contentment, but this week and next week, actually one other, before we do that, just let's forget that we're on contentment. Just a reminder to everybody, on Tuesday nights, I'm doing this Exploring Your Questions. We had 80 people out this last Tuesday. It was an absolute blast. We were sitting all around tables, having discussions about Satan and demons and spiritual warfare. It was fun. All right. By the way, was anybody here that was here on Tuesday night? Was it fun? It was fun. Okay. This week we're going to do it again, and even if you weren't here last week, you can come this week. Tuesday here at the church, 7:00. We'll be in the gym, round tables. You can come. You can bring a friend, and we're going to be talking about sexuality and gender and some of those really fun, hot topics. Even I've had questions about what are the schools teaching? How do we think about what are the schools teaching? All that sort of stuff. We're going to talk about that on Tuesday night and around tables, and you'll have a chance to discuss and ask questions. That's this Tuesday, so I'd encourage you to come. Anyway, now, back to, we're in this Secrets of Contentment. Now, tonight and next week, I want to talk about contentment a little bit from a different angle. Not the angle we often think about it from, which is the angle of being content with our stuff. So in the first 2 weeks, we talked a bit about that, being content with our stuff, with our money, contentment from the possessions side of things. But there's also a huge element of contentment that has to do just with life itself. Not just being content with your stuff or being content with your job and your money, but being content with your life and the problems that are in your life. It's not just about money. I think of in the 10 Commandments, Deuteronomy chapter 5, we see that coveting, which is the opposite of contentment, isn't just about possessions. Look at this. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. Now he goes on and he talks about your neighbor's house or land and servants, all that sort of stuff. A lot of this commandment is about stuff. A lot of it is about possessions. But it's also, now and again, also in ancient times, I know wives were, in a sense, kind of property to husbands, which was horrible. But I think there's actually a huge application out of this that has not to do with the stuff you own, but has to do with the life you live, the problems that are in your life, because we all have problems, and the things, the way your life is going and who you are. So the question is, what would it look like? What would it look like if we were to be content, not just with our stuff, but if we were to be content with life itself? What would that look like? What would it look like if you could be content? You know, I think we often have this idea, I would be content if, right? I would be content if my marriage didn't have struggles. Then I would be content. I would be content if my kids were better behaved, or they're older, they're making better choices, or whatever it is. If I felt better about my parenting, I would be content if I didn't have all the stress that I have at work. We have this idea, if. I would be content if things in these areas, marriage, family, or maybe I'd be content if I was married. I'd be content if my life was different than it is. The problem with thinking that way, however, is that your life, we'll start with the bad news and then we'll get to the good news. So the bad news is, your life will always have problems. If you were married to someone else, you would have problems just with a different person. If you had a different set of kids, you would have problems just with a different set of kids. It would just be different problems, different people. If you had a different job, you would have just different problems with that job. The fact of the matter is, and by the way, Jesus tells us this in the Gospels. He said clearly, in this life, you will have trouble. Look at this. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world, you will have trouble. You will have trouble. So there is no such thing as, if I was married, then I wouldn't have troubles. Or if I was married to someone else, then I wouldn't have troubles. Or if I had a different job, then I wouldn't have troubles. In this world, you will have trouble. But then he goes on to say this wonderful thing, but take heart. That's what we're talking about in today's service and in this series. But take heart. The point of this series isn't that I have secrets for you to get rid of your problems. The point of this series is, can we take heart? Can we find contentment in the midst of our problems? Can we be content with the family we have, or with singleness, or with the job that we have? Can we be content with the life we have? So, there's going to be 3 contentment keys we're going to tackle tonight. 2 of them are going to revolve around the same thing. Those are the last 2. But the first one is this. Contentment key number 1 is make your peace with the fact that you have problems. This is one of the first things we need to do, is we need to make our peace with the fact that we have problems. As long as we think we can only be content when our problems are gone, we're going to always struggle with contentment. We can't even get started on the road to contentment. Because we keep putting contentment down the road. We keep kicking it down the road to this mythical future or mythical life out there somewhere where there aren't problems and then I could be content. That life doesn't exist. Make your peace with the fact that you have problems. Stop waiting for your problems to go away before you think you can start to feel content. I mean, if I go to the money thing for just an instant, because it's so easy to illustrate. Some people think, because they're in the week-to-week, grind of maybe paying the bills, and they have constant stress and anxiety about paying the bills. And they think, I can't be content in this life because I'm too worried. I'm barely making it by. If only if I could make $100,000 a year, or can you imagine if I could make $1 million a year, then I wouldn't have worries. Then I would be content. But the funny thing is, if you did start making $1 million a year, do you know what would happen? So right now, whatever you're making a year, let's say you're making $50,000 a year, and it's tough for you to pay the bills of $50,000 a year, you think to yourself, oh man, if I was making $1 million a year, I would have money left over, I would have no stress. But do you know what the reality is of what you would do, or 99% of us would do, if we started making $1 million a year? We would buy a bigger house, probably a cottage, a couple of boats, one to ski, one to fish, several different vehicles, go on some trips, and guess what? We would fill up the $1 million. We fill up the 50, and then we fill up, if we made $1 million, we'd fill up $1 million. And guess what? We would find ourselves within a year worrying about payments again. It would just be bigger payments we'd be worried about. Not only that, but you would now have more stuff to worry about and take care of. I know we rent this cottage. Every year we go to Southern Ontario, Tobermory. It's beautiful. Do not go there in the middle of August, though. I consider myself a salesman for Tobermory, but don't go there when we're there. We love you guys 50 weeks of the year. But we go to Tobermory, and because we become friends with the couple that they own like 3 cottages on the beach. And every year we go there, and we just love it. It's like heaven. And every year we leave there, and we say to ourselves, I'm so glad we just rent it, and then we can leave. Because they have to worry about the stuff. They got to take care of this stuff. They got to fill the stuff. They got to shut the stuff down every fall, open it up every spring. There's more stuff to take care of. There's more stuff to worry about. The fact of the matter is, the more money you get, the more you have to worry about, and the bigger the bills you have to pay. And guess what? The job that pays you $1 million a year probably has bigger stresses than the jobs that pay you $50,000 a year. The fact of the matter is, make your peace with the fact that you have problems, because every life has its stresses and problems. The billionaire, you think the billionaire doesn't have stresses, they just have bigger stresses. Everybody, and then this brings up another thing that is so true, and that is this: all stress feels like what? Stress. Isn't that true? All stress feels like stress. If you're a billionaire and you're worried about your rocket ship, that's stressful. If you are, you're a single parent and you're just trying to make it by, you're just trying to make the bills, that feels like stress. But the billionaire that feels stressed about his rocket feels stressed the same. By the way, as a parent, this is the same with your kids. You get mad at your kids, act your age. By the way, they are. They don't come out of the womb mature, 40 years old, just fully mature and wonderful. They're young. They are actually asking their age. But when they're 4 and they stress about whatever, and you just think, oh, that's such a dumb thing to be stressed about. Yeah, it would be dumb for you at 35 or 40 or 45 to be stressed about it. But for them, stress feels like stress. So cut them some slack. Have a little empathy. A 4-year-old feels stress for 4-year-old things the same way as a 40-year-old feels stress for 40-year-old things. All stress feels like stress, which is why, again, this idea that I will feel content when is just, it's something we have to get rid of. It's a myth in our heads that keeps us from saying, I'm going to pursue contentment now. And again, we talked about this in the first sermon of this series, Philippians 4. Paul says, I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. The cool thing is here, and he talks about, being content whether you have a lot or whether you have a little. Paul gets this. Your circumstances can change. It doesn't change your need to seek after contentment. Your circumstances can change, whether little or much, you can still feel stress. So he says, I have learned, no matter the circumstances, we need to take the focus off of changing our circumstances to finding contentment where we are today. So the question is, so we had this, if I go back, so our contentment key here was, make your peace with the fact that you have problems. You have problems? Okay, they're there. Now, what are you going to do about seeking for contentment in the midst of the life that you have, with the problems that you have? Well, what keeps us from doing this? What keeps us from accepting the fact that, I have the life I have the problems I have, now I'm going to make the best of it. What keeps us from being able to do that? I think there's probably many things, but there's 2 things I want to talk about that keep us from doing this, all right? The first one is the blame game. Putting the responsibility for our situation or problems on someone or something else. And this is, by the way, a very, very natural subconscious reaction that most of us do. So I have problems in my life, I have stresses in my life, I'm going to blame something or someone else. Why am I stressed? It's not because I'm feeling stress, it's because my job is stressful. It's my job's fault, so I put it on the job. Why am I feeling angry? It's because my boss said this to me. So now I feel angry. So we put the blame for what we're doing. Never mind that Paul said, I've learned the secret to being content in whatever the circumstances. And we put the blame for our lack of contentment on other people and other things. By the way, if your contentment rests on people and things all around you always working out perfectly, guess how much of your life is going to be spent being content? Like if you need everybody on the drive to work to drive perfectly, that already never happens anywhere here in Steinbach. If your contentment rests on everybody's going to drive perfectly, well, the way you interpret perfect, you're not going to feel content for heaven. If your contentment rests on everything at work must always go well, you're going to have a hard time feeling content. If your contentment rests on my kids are going to be perfectly behaved at all times, wow. In for a shock. Not many days of contentment ahead of you. This is called the blame game. Now, we do have to deal with something here. Someone might say, yeah, but there are actual instances where, someone has done something horrible to me or something horrible has happened to me. Like there are actual instances where we actually are victims, right? Of circumstance or something someone's done, for some people, and we have people in this church, people here, who in your childhood you were abused in some horrific way. That's horrible. You actually are a victim. That's something bad happened to you and it's not your fault. All right? And the question is, well, it is their responsibility. That situation was their responsibility. It wasn't my fault. Here's the key, though. Here's the key. It's not your fault that something bad was done to you or that something bad happened to you. But what you're going to do going forward is your responsibility. But it's easier for us sometimes, as a self-protection mechanism, it's easier for us to keep putting the blame on someone in the past who maybe legitimately did do something horrible to you. It's easier to put the blame on them so that I'm not responsible for what happens to my life now. And this goes hand in hand with the blame game, is the taking on of a victim mentality. Yes, you actually may have been in your life, all of us at certain points in our lives actually are real victims. People actually do bad things to us, yes. But at a certain point, yes, this person took something from you in the past. Are you also going to give them the rest of your present and future? Like, are you going to give them the rest of your life? Yeah, they took something from you in the past. You can't change that now. Are you going to give them the rest of your future? See, someone with a victim mentality, at a certain point, you go through something horrible, you have to grieve, you have to go through anger, you have to work through all these emotions, you have to get help, you have to tell your story over and over again and get the healing you need. Yes, but at a certain point, what's happening is you're actually just stuck in your past now. You're not moving forward. And your whole future and present is being taken away from you by something that happened in the past. That's a victim mentality when you start to hold on to your victimness as part of your identity. And it's really important that we not do that. So this brings up what I just said before, contentment key number 2. And this is our last two. Then this is what this sermon is called, is radical responsibility. I actually think radical responsibility is a huge key, biblical key, and character key to finding contentment and joy in life no matter the circumstances. So radical responsibility acknowledges, it's not your fault that bad things have been done to you. It isn't. And you shouldn't feel like it's your fault. You shouldn't feel guilty for things that aren't your fault. But here's the but. It's your responsibility what you do with your life going forward. And as long as you don't take this responsibility and you live in the past, the people and the circumstances that hurt you get to take your whole life. And that's actually that's not the kind of power you should give to your past. That's not the kind of power you should give to people from your past. Now, I love this analogy. I heard it once somewhere else. I'm not smart enough to come up with it. And I forget the name of the guy who said it. But I love this analogy. Imagine that you wake up one morning and you find on your front doorstep someone has dropped a baby off. There's no letter, there's no note. All right? Now, is it your fault that there's a random baby sitting on your doorstep? The answer is no, it's not your fault. You didn't choose to have that baby put there. It's not your baby. It's not your fault that there's a baby there. What kind of a person would you be, though, if you shut the door and it's like, that's not my fault. That's not my baby. I didn't put the baby there. It's not my baby, and I didn't put the baby there. So you shut the door and you leave the baby. What kind of a person are you? It's not your fault that the baby is there, but whose responsibility is it now that it's there? You don't feel guilty about it. You don't feel shame. Oh, I did this horrible thing and now there's a baby on my front doorstep. No, that's not helpful at all. But now that the baby's there, now that you have this big issue in your life because of circumstances or someone did something to you, now that it's there, it's up to you to take responsibility. What are you going to do going forward? You're going to take that baby in. You're going to call the appropriate, authorities. You're going to try and find their parents. You're going to make sure in the meantime that this baby is taken care of and fed and, watered and dry and warm and all this sort of stuff. You're going to do all of that because it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. This is like a hugely, hugely important truth for life. There are lots of things in your life that are not your fault. But you've been focused on the fact that it's not your fault, and so you haven't taken any responsibility going forward now to make the best of the life that you have. It might not be your fault. A spouse might have left you. A kid might have made some horrible decisions. You actually might have done some horrible things, and it was your fault, but now you got to make, this is the bed you're in. Now you got to lie in it. At some point, you have to take responsibility. I can't change the past, so what am I going to do going forward? That's a huge part, actually, of coming to contentment and joy in a life like Paul talked about, where you can learn to do it in any circumstances. Now, problem, this blame game victim mentality is like wired into our DNA. I mean, the very first The very first story in Scripture is a story about what? Blame. Right? Garden of Eden, God makes two trees, tree of life, tree of knowledge of good and evil. There's a whole bunch of other trees too. He says you can eat from any of them, including the tree of life. You can't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? So let's whip through these are my paraphrases. Okay, that's why it doesn't say NIV. This is the Kris Duerksen paraphrase. Genesis 2:17, God says to Adam, don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Right? So he knows there's going to be bad consequences, all right? So what happens next? Snake comes to Eve. You won't really die if you eat that fruit. So what do Adam and Eve do? They eat the fruit. Now, what's going to happen next? God comes to the garden. Something terrible's happened. We got bad consequences on the horizon. He said it's going to be bad if you eat from this tree. So what's going to happen next? Well, what should happen next to help them move on is they should own up. They should be there at the front of the garden. When God comes, it's like, we screwed up. We're so sorry. We accept our responsibility for this, but can you help us through this? Let's see, is that how they respond? Well, let's get into the actual, what the Scripture says. Now, God said, who told you, Adam, that you were naked? Whoa. Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from? All right? I want you to notice the blame game here. Adam actually doesn't blame just one person, he blames two. The man said, the woman he blames God. The woman you put there with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree and I ate it. That's a blame game. It's right in our DNA. It's right from the start. This is what we do to protect ourselves from feeling bad about ourselves. We don't want to feel ever like it's our fault. So Adam he even blames God. I mean, this guy who just 2 chapters before is like, or 1 chapter before is like, whoa, God makes a woman. He's like, woohoo. Now that everything's gone sour, he's like, the woman you put there with me. Like, if you hadn't done that, I wouldn't have eaten this fruit. She gave it to me. Like, what am I supposed to do? Exercise my free will and intelligence and make a good decision? I couldn't do it. So she gave me some fruit from the tree and I ate it. Well, so now God looks at Eve, and is she going to take responsibility? And the Lord God said to the woman, what is this you have done? And the woman said, the serpent deceived me. I couldn't help it. Serpent just started talking. When a serpent talks to you, what are you going to do? You're just going to eat the out. So that reminds me of a joke. Mr. McAllister used to always tell me this joke. Adam blamed Eve. Eve blamed the snake, and the snake didn't have a leg to stand on. Isn't that kind of good? It's a blame game. Nobody wants to take responsibility. This is just in our DNA. Now, why? What is it about blaming others and having the victim mentality? Why do we naturally go there? Subconsciously, what are the benefits we're looking for? I just want to cover 4, because you'll see some of this in your own life. Why the blame game and playing the victim role are so attractive to us. First of all, self-protection. We don't want to feel bad about ourselves. It's like physically painful to think it's my fault that something bad happened. So without even consciously thinking about it, we just protect ourselves. And I think a lot of time we play these games, we don't even know we're doing it. And in the short term, by the way, all of these advantages are short-term advantages. In the short term, I can save myself a little bit of inner pain by blaming my circumstances and blaming the people around me. What are some other things? What are some other short-term benefits from playing the blame game? Others feel sorry for you and give you attention. Lots of people fall into this trap. And by the way, in the beginning, when something bad happens to you, we need that. We need attention from other people, empathy, sympathy. We need people to hear our story. We need people to come around us. That's a good thing. But at a certain point, depending on the severity of what happened, weeks or months or years down the road, at a certain point, you have to move on. And for some people, they've come to be addicted. They need that attention. So they wallow in the past. Another reason we sometimes subconsciously play the blame game and play the victim is people are less likely to criticize you. You can save yourself a lot of criticism if you set yourself up as the victim, as the persecuted person. You can say, and then there's the sympathy by telling your story over and over again. there are some short-term gains to be had and manipulation to be done by playing the blame game. But the problem is, in the long run, these things make you helpless and unhappy and discontented. In the short term, you might get yourself a little bit of attention and sympathy. In the short term, you might save yourself a little bit of pain. But in the long term, in the long run, you will rob yourself of happiness and contentment, and you will make yourself helpless. And there's a wonderful parable, which in its original context isn't aimed at this, but I think we can draw some really good points out of it from this. It's this famous parable of the talents in Matthew 25. And I think we can draw some great lessons from this parable. And it's a famous parable. And it starts like this. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag. Now, first thing here, this is life. Life's not fair. We don't all get born with the same advantages. We don't all get born into the same level of healthy family. And the family you're born in has a huge impact on how emotionally and mentally healthy and successful you're going to be in the future. That's just a fact. It's not fair. One guy gets 5, one guy gets 1, one guy gets 2. This is life. And people get born with different levels of intelligence. People get born with different levels of likability and athleticism and ability and all kinds of things. One gets 5, one gets 2, one gets 1. That's actually how life works. It isn't fair. Well, the first 2 servants make the best of what they have. The man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. He's got more ability, he's got more opportunity, and he just makes the best of what he has. The reality of the world is, if there's one guy with 5 bags, there's also someone out there with 50. Some people are just incredible. They're so incredible it almost makes you sick. And he just goes about and makes the best of what he has. The one with 2 bags gets 2 more. He's not as capable or skilled or amazing as the one with 5 bags, but he just does the best with what he has. So they make the best of what they have. What about the third servant, the one with the least amount of advantages? But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. The man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. So here's the guy that has the least advantage, the least ability, the least talent. Life is more stacked against him. And so we want to feel sorry. He wants to feel sorry for himself. He wants to feel sorry for himself. And we can all feel sorry. That's too bad. And it is. There's so many people in this world. It's too bad. You're actually behind. So he just takes his stuff and he hides his master's money. All right? Well, we know how this famous parable ends. So the first 2, and I just skipped over that part, they get rewarded when the master comes back. Now we come to the man with the 1 bag. The man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew. Now look at this. I want you to notice what do we see here right away again, just like with Adam and Eve. It's a blame game. Look at this. I knew that you are a hard man. Why did you do nothing with what you had been given? Because you are a hard man. Harvesting where you have not sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So, therefore, I was afraid. I didn't do anything with what you'd given me. I was so caught up in my disadvantages that I just did nothing. So I was afraid. Why? Because of you. You're the problem. That's blame. I'm not going to make the most of what I do have because circumstances, because life's not fair, where you have not scattered seeds. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here's what belongs to you. Now, the rest of this parable gets crazy harsh. And just remember in parables, everything Jesus is doing is exaggerated. It's a parable. It's like a cartoon. It's exaggerated for effect to make the point he's trying to make. So don't get confused. Okay, so here we just go next. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. Now, a lot of people just go, oh, see, that's God. Okay, this is a parable. There are other parables that show that God is not like this. Every parable has a point, and everything in the parable is exaggerated to make the point. The point of this is not that we Christians or God should be super hard on people that we judge. They're just not making the best of what they have. They're going to need to pull up their bootstraps. By the way, you want to know how I know that? Rabbit trail. Same chapter. We're in Matthew 25. Same chapter. Look what Jesus tells us to do when we meet with people who are less advantaged than us. Then the king will say to those on his right, these are the good ones, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat." Okay, so I want to stop here for just a moment. The parable of the wicked, lazy servant is not the parable for you to look and judge other people. That's a parable for looking at yourself. That's not a parable for you to go, so-and-so or such and such group of people or whatever, they are the wicked, lazy servant. No, don't do that. That is a parable for you to look in the mirror at yourself. Am I the wicked, lazy servant? When you want to know how you should judge other people, then you go to the next part of the chapter, which is, I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. We go to this. When we think about others, we come to this part of Matthew 25 where we find that the one with 5 talents and 10 talents needs to take some of his and her talents and give a hand up to some of the ones that are trailing behind and bring them along with you. This is what we do to others. The servants and the talents is how we examine ourselves. That's really important. All right, back to this. Final thing from Matthew 25. Life doesn't care about your reasons or your excuses. For whoever has will be given more. Don't we see this at work in the world? It's not fair. It's absolutely not fair. The truth of the matter is we can, as Christians, we can look to help and be generous and help those who are behind. Absolutely. But in the end, when we think about ourselves and having a victim mentality, we have to remember, for whoever has will be given more. That's just reality of often how things go. And they will have an abundance. And whoever does not have, even what they have, will be taken from them. This is why having a victim mentality, it's so important by the grace of God to throw that off. The world isn't going to sit around and feel sorry for you. So at a certain point you have to say, this is my life. This is the life I have now. These are the problems and the circumstances that I am confronting. So now I'm going to make the best of this life that I have. Not by spending my whole life wishing I was in a different life. That is a path to discontentment. So, final key. The contentment keys and the radical responsibility. Radical responsibility. Accept the things in your life that you can't change. This doesn't mean you accept everything in your life, because some things in your life you can change. You don't have to accept that you're a jerk, because you can change that. All right? Accept the things you can't change. Take responsibility for the things that you can. Now, I have a story. How many of you would admit in church that you have ever liked or listened to heavy metal rock music? Okay. We'll have a ministry time after for all of those people. Okay, because obviously that's the devil's music. But anyway, okay, so just in 1983, so those of you who have ever been into kind of that heavy metal rock music, all right, you might recognize some of these names. Actually, I think all of you that is over 30 will recognize some of these names. In 1983, talented guitarist is part of a heavy metal band that has been together for a couple of years. They've been working hard. They have just signed with a record label, and they're about to begin recording their first big album. They're going to make some serious coin. And just a couple of days before they start working on this album after their big deal, and they're going to start making money on this first album, they kick this young, talented guitarist out of the band, like just right before. This guy goes, we have some reflective music already too, which is amazing. This guy goes through a period of absolute shock and devastation. How could they? He didn't see it coming. How could they do this to me right before we made it big? I have blood, sweat, and tears in this band. How could they do this to me? When he finally gets through the shock and the devastation, then comes the rage. And he is enraged, and he decides to himself, I am going to prove these guys wrong by making another band and being more successful than them. So he spends the next few years working literally day and night like a maniac. He recruits the best musicians he can find. He writes dozens of songs. They practice hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours. And within a couple of years, they actually get a record label deal of their own. And eventually, they end up becoming millionaires. They sell 25 million albums, okay, and became a very successful band called Megadeth. Now, how many of you have ever heard of Megadeth? Okay, that is a very bad, none of the rest of you go out and listen to that now on Spotify. So that's Megadeth. Now, the man's name was Dave Mustaine. You say, what does this have to do with any of this? They interviewed Dave Mustaine in 2003, and in tears, he said he had never been able to enjoy any of this band's success. They sold 25 million albums. These guys traveled the world, and all these decades and decades later, he is still disappointed. He's now even had success in his life, and he can't be happy with any of it. You want to know the reason why? The band that kicked him out was a band by the name of Metallica. Any of you heard of that one? Dave Mustaine sold 25 million albums. They sold 180 million. And he defined the rest of his life, he defined his life as the guy who got kicked out of Metallica and lost to Metallica in the competition. What a dumb way. I mean, I get it. I don't mean dumb in the sense of no one else would ever do something so stupid. Fact of the matter is, lots of us do stuff just that stupid. He never accepted the fact that what had happened. And he just took responsibility to say, you know what? I'm just going to define my life by what I do now going forward. Paul said, I have learned the secret of being content in any and every circumstance. Dave Mustaine became a millionaire and famous and successful, and he still couldn't be content. That's what a victim mentality and the blame game will do to you. So, I want to finish by, that was cool. Sometimes people get so trapped in a victim mentality and the blame game that they can't see the many other good things in their lives. Isn't that true? You get so stuck on what's been done to you and how those people, what they did to you, and I'm not going to move on, I can't move on, and then you can't even see that there's all this good stuff there. So, we're going to take a minute, and I want us to just prayerfully reflect on a couple of questions. One, is there something in your life you can't change that you just need to make peace with it already? It's just, maybe you got a grown kid and they're just not making great decisions. Can you change them? Can you change them? If you can't, maybe you got to make peace with some of that. Is there something in your life that you need to take responsibility for? Maybe you've been in a mess and you've just been putting responsibility on something or someone else. Maybe it's time for you. God's saying to you tonight, he's saying, it's time for you just to make the best of the life you got. Why don't you bow your head with me and close your eyes? Father, is there anything in our lives that's out of our control that we just need to accept it? We just need to make peace with it. We need to move on from thinking about wishing that that was gone, that had never happened, because it did happen. So now it's there. Father, would you bring that to our minds and allow us to just let that go? Father, maybe there's something we need to take responsibility for. Got to stop wishing we were in a different marriage or wishing that we were married or wishing whatever, that we were in a different circumstance. This is the life we have, so we're going to make the best of it. Thank you, Jesus, that about this very topic, contentment, this very topic we're talking about, Philippians 4:13 says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So we just say that out loud and we declare it. That by your strength, we can find contentment and we can accept these things and we can move forward and make the best. In Jesus' name we pray. And all God's people said, amen.